Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to the Restless Cabal.
So this first boss in Crucible is a single phase fight with two bosses that have their own health pool. The fight can easily go wrong if you don't understand the core mechanics of the fight, but once you're past that, it's essentially free loot. So let's get straight into it.
So the main thing to understand is the relics. There are 3 relics within the room that each boss will activate when they reach set health points. They will always activate the relic that is closest to them, so you get to choose the order by positioning them beforehand. Now they can activate the same relic more than once, but doing so will give them a massive damage increase buff, so you've got to make sure that each boss only activates each particular relic once. They will activate a relic at 75, 50 and 25% health, and they can both activate a relic at the same time, which probably isn't a good idea, so you'll want to swap damage on the bosses throughout the fight to make sure that that is never the case. Once you've dealt with a relic, the boss that activated it will gain a flat 10% damage increase. This you need to take into account when choosing your order. Now when each boss activates a relic, they'll also do their own special ability. The speaker will spawn a Visage from Beyond ad. This ad remains in the encounter for 90 seconds before it despawns. It remains rooted, casting Terrifying Echo, a long cast that when finishes, deals a burst of damage to the raid and fears you for 6 seconds. This can only be interrupted by bringing the ad to 1 health, so the moment it spawns, DPS must swap to it to bring it down. Once at 1 HP, it will begin to regenerate health. You'll need to swap to it multiple times to stop it from casting again. As for the feared, he'll spawn 3 Eldritch Abominations. These ads will stand still, casting Witness the End. Once this cast finishes, it instantly kills the ad, but also does a burst of damage to the raid, and increases the damage you take from Witness the End by 100% for 6 seconds. If 2 of these casts go off simultaneously, you're going to have a rough time without stacking damage reduction cooldowns. Boss mods will mark all 3 ads when they spawn, and we just assign interrupts to 2 of them. One of the ads is just left to cast, which kills it off, whilst the other 2 are interrupted a second or so before their cast finishes. We then let another ad go off, whilst interrupting the last ad as late as possible. The last ad can now be ignored and left to cast. By timing your interrupt late, it gives you enough time for the debuff on the raid to drop, and means that you do not need to assign more than 3 players to deal with all of the interrupts on the ads.
So let's talk about the relic themselves. To start off, you'll want to do the Tempest Cooler relic. This deals ticking damage to the raid for 15 seconds whilst also applying a debuff which reduces the damage you deal by 50%. Anyone that drops below 25% while this relic is active will be instantly killed. You want to organise healing cooldowns for each time this relic is used to keep everyone as safe as possible. Once the first Tempest Cooler relic is finished, we do it shortly afterwards with the other boss for a second time. Getting these out the way first is a good idea as their damage increase hasn't been applied yet, and really this is the only relic that is affected by the damage increase buff. After we've done both of them, we move the bosses to the Voidstone relic. Once active, this makes the entire raid immune to healing. Do note though, this doesn't affect absorption shields. Whatever boss activated the relic will gain Umbral Shell, giving them a large shield that you've got to plow all your DPS into. Once it's finally broken, the immunity on the raid is removed and healers can begin to top people again. This really isn't a bad point for tanks to use their own or external cooldowns, as there isn't really another point in the fight that's that dangerous. And as the debuff only affects direct healing and not absorption shields, this might be a point where you'll want to spam rapture shields into the tanks or use the popular shield trinkets that most healers are using right now. Once the void zone has been done once by each boss, you can then move them on to the final relic, which is the Trident of the Deep Ocean. Once active, this creates a large bubble around the relic and the health of it can be seen on boss frames, however this bubble cannot be directly attacked. When the bubble is finished casting, it will deal damage based on its remaining health, which will instantly kill you if it has too much. The way that you deal damage to the bubble is by having the bosses tanked inside, as 75% of the damage they take will instead be transferred to the bubble. Once you've done that relic for each boss, you can then finally kill both of them off. You do however need to make sure you kill them both within 20 seconds of each other, otherwise they'll just simply heal for 20% of their maximum health. And that's the main part of the fight that you need to get down. The bosses do however have their own spells and mechanics, and you should probably know them as well.
So let's start off with the tanks. So the speaker doesn't really melee hit and will instead frequently cast Aphotic Blast. This deals a moderate amount of damage, but it is reduced significantly the further away the target is from the boss. This also deals splash damage to all players within 5 yards of the target. When you are hit, you're also debuffed, increasing your threat generation. If this debuff times out, you'll become hostile to all allies and take a reduced amount of healing for a short period of time. And of course this can get you killed if your raid doesn't like you very much. If you're tanking the boss, however, the ability is cast frequently enough for the debuff to never drop. It's only really the splash damage on other players you need to watch out for. We assigned a strong single target range DPS to tank this boss the entire fight and made sure that other players stood clear of them. To make it safer, we also made a rule to never attack the speaker until 10 seconds after the pull, to make sure whatever player was assigned to tank the boss would definitely keep aggro throughout the entire fight. Now as for the other boss, the Feared, he does need to be tanked by a real tank. He'll frequently cast Sheer Mind, dealing a large amount of physical damage and debuffing you with stacking 10% reduced stats for 20 seconds. You want to taunt swap here every 3 stacks or so. Now let's move on to what everyone else needs to watch out for. The Speaker will cast Cerebral Assault. This large cone deals a moderate amount of damage and makes any player hit also hostile to allies for 4 seconds after a long cast. You have a lot of time to move from this ability and the animation is very obvious, just don't get hit. Also to keep an eye on is the Dark Herald debuff. This short-lived debuff creates a zone around the player. Anyone within the zone, including the player, will gain Promises of Power. This permanent new debuff increases your damage by 10% but also reduces your maximum health by 10%, and this will just stack naturally all the way up to 9. This debuff can however be dispelled, which on Heroic will deal a burst of damage to whoever dispelled the player. The debuff isn't needed for any aspect of the fight, and as a result you should probably avoid spreading it onto the raid and instead move away from other players if you have the Dark Herald debuff. Healers just need to make sure they dispel the debuff off the player once the Dark Herald debuff times out and dispel any other player that accidentally received the debuff. Another debuff to watch out for is the Crushing Doubt. This dot is applied to multiple raid members and increases in damage over the course of its duration. When it expires, it deals a burst of damage to the entire raid, and this importantly is reduced by distance. So the moment the debuff is applied to you, gain distance from the rest of the raid to keep the expiration damage to a minimum. Last to mention is the Void Crash Circles. When they initially spawn they'll be pretty big, but they're very easy to move from. Whenever they land, they'll bounce back up and land somewhere else again shortly afterwards, but the circle will be smaller. This is repeated until they're finally soaked by a player. Just keep in mind, the larger they are, the more damage they deal, so ideally you'll want to soak them when they're at their smallest size after 2 bounces. That said, if there isn't any other raid-wide damage incoming and you're at full health, you should be able to soak them at full size pretty safely. And that's all it is for this boss, so just get the relic order down, make sure you deal with the different debuffs and tank mechanics while soaking circles when it's safe to do so. Easy as that.
If you'd like a recap of this encounter with more detailed breakdowns of the mechanics, then check out our written guide over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description. Thank you very much for watching guys, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Take care.